This is the story of a father who understood every Italian word spoken around him and quietly uncovered a wedding scheme designed to turn his daughter's trust and property into collateral.
The first warning came in Italian, 6 feet away from me, over a bottle of wine I had paid for. My daughter's future father-in-law leaned toward his wife and said, "He wants his daughter happy so badly, he'll sign anything." Then my daughter's fiancé laughed. They had no idea I understood every word. 25 years earlier, before I became an architectural metal fabricator in North Carolina, I had spent 4 years working construction jobs in northern Italy. I came home fluent, but almost nobody knew it, not even my daughter, so I kept eating. I listened as they mocked my work, insulted my home, called my daughter predictable, and discussed paperwork they planned to place in front of me before the wedding. They called it a family trust. What they didn't know was that the document would use 17 acres of my commercial property as collateral for debts tied to their collapsing European business. And my daughter knew absolutely nothing. I wanted to expose them right there. Instead, I smiled. I paid for dinner. I invited them to stay in my guest cottage. I asked stupid questions and let them believe the quiet American contractor was exactly as gullible as they hoped. For 3 weeks, they talked freely around me. Then came the rehearsal dinner. 46 guests sat beneath the string lights as I raised my champagne glass and looked directly at the family who thought they had already won. I began my toast in flawless Italian. Their smiles vanished. Before that night ended, the trust was dead, the wedding was over, and my daughter finally learned why her fiancé had really chosen her. So tell me, would you confront them immediately, or stay silent until you had enough proof to destroy the entire lie? Subscribe and stay with me, because they underestimated the wrong father. My name is Ansel Merrick, and for most of my adult life I have made things that are supposed to hold weight. Stair rails, structural canopies, custom steel doors, bronze storefronts, decorative trusses, hand-forged gates. If an architect could draw it, and a building needed it to stay straight for 50 years, my shop probably knew how to build it. I started Merrick Architectural Metals in a rented bay outside Asheville when I was 28, after 4 years working overseas and another 2 years welding for a commercial contractor in Charlotte. By 62, I employed 43 people, owned my fabrication yard outright, and held 17 acres near the I-26 corridor that had become far more valuable than I ever expected when I bought it for almost nothing in the 90s. None of that made me sophisticated in the way Ettore Bellori understood sophistication, but it did make me very difficult to impress with a watch, an accent, or a surname. My wife, Celeste, used to say I had 2 speeds, working and pretending not to work. She was a landscape designer who could make an empty patch of red Carolina clay look inevitable within 3 seasons. And she was the reason our home outside Hendersonville had stone terraces, white hydrangeas, and an orchard that produced more apples than any sane family could eat. Celeste died 7 years before Leora's engagement, after a short illness that took our future apart with almost no warning. Our daughter was 24 then, old enough to understand death and young enough to believe grief should eventually obey a schedule. We learned together that it did not. Leora was 31 when she met Raphael Bellori at a medical equipment conference in Atlanta. She was a pediatric physical therapist, practical in most areas of life. But love made her optimistic in ways I recognized because she had inherited them from her mother. Raphael was 34, educated in Milan, polished without appearing rehearsed, and working in international partnerships for a specialty food and hospitality group based partly in New York and partly in northern Italy. He remembered names, asked thoughtful questions, and sent Celeste's favorite flowers to the house the first time he came for dinner because Leora had mentioned them once. I wanted to dislike him on principle because that is a father's traditional duty, but for the first several months I could not find a reason. He proposed after 14 months. He asked for my blessing in my workshop on a rainy Tuesday morning, standing beneath sparks from a grinder while one of my crews finished a staircase stringer 20 feet away. "I love her," he said. "I know that sounds simple, but I mean it in the complicated way." The sentence was good enough that I remembered it. His eyes looked wet when he spoke about building a family. I shook his hand and told him my blessing was not ownership, but he had it. The trouble arrived with his parents. Ettore and Vittoria Bellori flew from Turin 3 weeks before the rehearsal dinner. Ettore introduced himself as chairman of Bellori Mercantile Group, a family import company dealing in specialty foods, wine, and luxury hospitality products. Vittoria spoke about estates, vineyards, and old family relationships with the casual confidence of someone who had spent decades measuring rooms by whether she recognized the surnames inside them. Leora wanted everyone to get along. I wanted that too, enough that I booked dinner at Rowan and Field, a high-end farm restaurant outside Black Mountain with mountain views, local wine, and the sort of dining room designed to make visitors believe Western North Carolina had been waiting specifically for them. The evening started with wine. Ettore held up the bottle I had selected and studied the label as though searching for an apology. North Carolina? He asked. Yadkin Valley, I said. Cabernet Franc. Good vineyard. He gave a small smile. How ambitious. Vittoria asked what I did for work, though Raphael had explained it before. I told her I owned a metal fabrication company. Industrial, she asked. Architectural mostly. How practical. She said practical the way some people say unfortunate. Leora shot me a quick apologetic look. I smiled. I had been underestimated by architects, developers, bankers, inspectors, and clients who assumed the man in work boots could not read a contract. Condescension was unpleasant, but it was not new. I could eat it with dinner if it kept my daughter happy. Halfway through the meal, Ettore switched to Italian. Her dress looks provincial, Vittoria murmured, glancing at Leora's simple blue dress. Pretty, but provincial. Ettore smirked. Everything here is provincial. I kept chewing. Then they began discussing the restaurant, the local stone, the chairs, the display wall near the bar, where the restaurant featured photographs and samples from regional craftspeople. One photograph showed a floating steel and walnut staircase my company had fabricated for a mountain home 2 years earlier. Vittoria leaned toward Ettore. Look at that. Americans weld metal together and call it artistry. Ettore answered. At least the contractor probably charged enough to feel important. Raphael laughed. My fork slowed. Leora noticed. You okay, Dad? Fine. She smiled and returned to her conversation. I looked at the photograph across the room. 3 of my men had spent 6 weeks fitting that staircase. I had personally redesigned the central spine when the original architect's detail proved impossible to install safely. It was not art because I wanted praise. It was good work because anything carrying people between floors deserves respect. Hearing them mock it bothered me. Hearing Raphael laugh bothered me more. I still said nothing. Dessert arrived. Ettore ordered espresso and leaned toward his son. Are the papers ready? Raphael answered in Italian without hesitation. The first draft. The Luxembourg language needs one adjustment. My coffee stopped halfway to my mouth. Vittoria glanced toward me. He will sign? Raphael smiled. Ansel wants Leora happy so badly he will sign anything if we tell him it protects her. He is predictable. Ettore chuckled. The father is desperate for approval. I placed my cup down carefully. Leora was showing Vittoria a photograph on her phone and heard none of it. I looked at Raffaele. He caught my eye and gave me a warm smile, switching to English as smoothly as closing a door. You enjoying the coffee, Ansel? Very much. What do you think of the dessert? Better than expected. Good. I leaned back. You know, Raphael, I've always thought people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe nobody important is listening. His expression shifted for half a second. Then he smiled. Interesting philosophy. It has served me well. Ettore raised his glass. To family. I raised mine to clarity. Nobody reacted. That was when I knew I could wait. I paid the bill. I tipped the server. I shook Ettore's hand. Vittoria kissed Leora on both cheeks and told her the evening had been charming. Raffaele hugged me and called me Papa, as if he had already earned the word. In the parking lot, Leora wrapped her arms around me. Thank you for trying so hard. My throat tightened. Anything for you. She smiled. They can be a little formal, a little. Raphael says his father has been stressed about the business. What kind of stress? She shrugged. Expansion, taxes, family things. I don't really understand the European structure. Neither did I, not yet. I watched her get into Raphael's car. Then I sat alone in my truck after they drove away and let the words return. Luxembourg language, the papers. He will sign, predictable. I had heard enough to know there was a plan and not enough to know what the plan was. So I called Malcolm Keir. Malcolm had worked project controls with me on industrial construction jobs in northern Italy when we were in our 20s. Unlike me, he never came back to building. He moved into corporate risk, fraud review, and cross-border due diligence. We had not spoken in almost 2 years, but when I called at 11:48 that night, he answered on the third ring. Ansel Merrick. Either somebody died or somebody lied. Second one. He became quiet. What do you need? I need you to look at a family in Turin. Bellori Mercantile Group. Ettore Bellori. Raffaele Bellori. What am I looking for? I don't know. That helps. They're preparing some kind of trust. Luxembourg. My commercial land may be involved. Malcolm's tone changed. Send me everything you have. Names, companies, addresses, whatever your daughter told you. When can you know something? Enough to worry you? Tomorrow. Enough to prove something? Give me a few days. I looked across the dark parking lot toward the restaurant windows. They think I'm stupid. Malcolm laughed softly. That is usually useful. I ended the call and drove home slowly. My daughter texted before I reached the driveway. Dad, thank you. Tonight meant so much. I parked beneath the oak trees Celeste planted and read the message twice. Then I typed, anything for you, kiddo. Sleep well. I did not tell her what I had heard. Not because I wanted to keep secrets from my daughter. Because a father who accuses the man she loves without proof is not protecting her. He is asking her to choose sides before she understands the battlefield. I needed facts, and the Belloris, confident I could not understand their language, were about to give me more than enough. The next morning I called Lyora before 7. She answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep. Dad, I had an idea. That sounds dangerous. Eder and Vittoria should stay in the guest cottage instead of that hotel in Asheville. Silence. What? They're driving 40 minutes each way. We've got the cottage. Let them use it until the rehearsal dinner. She sounded instantly awake. Are you serious? Yes. Dad, after last night? Last night was fine. It had not been fine, but I needed them comfortable. People are more revealing in borrowed spaces when they believe the owner is harmless. Leora exhaled. That would mean a lot to Raphael. Then invite them. The guest cottage sat beyond the orchard 30 yards from the main house. I built it 12 years earlier for Celeste's mother after a hip replacement, then kept it as a place for friends and family. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, screened porch. It was private enough that guests relaxed, and close enough that anyone walking to the main house passed my workshop. Ettore and Vittoria moved in that afternoon. They thanked me graciously. Vittoria complimented the stonework. Ettore asked whether I had hired local labor. I did most of the metal and framing myself. He nodded. Of course, I smiled. For 6 days I played the role they had written for me. I grilled steaks, while Eder explained Italian beef to me. I listened to Vittoria criticize the arrangement of my garden as though the Appalachian climate needed European supervision. I intentionally mispronounced 2 Italian menu words during lunch and watched the couple exchange amused looks. At night, when they sat on the guest cottage porch with wine, they often slipped back into Italian because it was easier. I never hovered. I did not need to. They spoke freely whenever I was within earshot because they believed the language itself was a wall. On Friday afternoon, I was replacing a hinge on the workshop door when Vittoria and Ettore crossed the yard behind me. The American land is the key, Vittoria said in Italian. Eder answered. Only if the trust is executed before the bank review. What about Raphael's lawsuit? Separate matter. And the girl? He controls her. My wrench stopped for half a second. Then I kept working. The girl, my daughter. Not Leora. Not future daughter-in-law. The girl. Eder continued. After marriage, she will defend him from the father. That is the useful part. They passed into the house. I set the wrench down. My hands were shaking. This was the moment when emotion nearly ruined strategy. I wanted to follow them inside and ask in Italian whether my daughter's usefulness had been fully modeled into their debt plan. Instead, I walked to the sink in my workshop, ran cold water over my wrists, and waited until the heat left my face. At 8:22 that evening, Malcolm called. "I have the first pass." I went to my truck and closed the door. "Tell me, Belori Mercantile is not what they present publicly." Revenue collapsed after 2 distribution contracts failed. There's a restructuring proceeding in Italy. Multiple tax claims. Their family property outside Turin has liens. How bad? Bad enough that they need liquidity fast. And Raphael? He has a civil judgment pending from a failed specialty food venture. Investors claim misrepresentation of inventory and contracts. It isn't criminal from what I can see, but it's expensive. Leora knows none of this. I assumed. What about Luxembourg? Malcolm paused. There are references to a private holding structure tied to a lender. I need actual draft language before I can tell you what it does. I'll get it. Do not sign anything. I'm not stupid. Smart people sign bad documents every day because someone they love tells them what the document means. That line followed me inside. Sunday brunch gave me the draft. I served biscuits, eggs, smoked trout, and coffee on the back porch. Leora and Raffaele joined us. The morning was warm. Cicadas already loud in the trees. Eder waited until plates were half cleared before shifting into business. "Ansel," he said, "Raphael tells us you own commercial property. Some. 17 acres near the interstate?" Raphael smiled apologetically. I mentioned it. Of course he had. Eder folded his hands. "In our family, marriage is not only emotional. We organize assets so children are protected from uncertainty. We have prepared a family trust concept for Leora and Raffaele. You might consider contributing the commercial property as your side of the family's protection." Leora looked surprised. "Dad doesn't need to do that." Vittoria touched her hand. "No one needs to. That is why it is meaningful." I watched Raffaele. He did not look at Leora. He looked at me. "What would the trust do?" I asked. Eder smiled as though a fish had approached the hook. "Provide shared security. The land remains economically within the family structure. It allows future financing, development, inheritance planning. Sounds complicated. We would handle the complexity. I build stairs." Vittoria smiled. "Exactly. I pretended not to notice the insult. Send me the draft. I'll read it." Eder's eyes brightened. "Of course." Leora squeezed my forearm. "Dad, you do not have to give us anything." I looked at her. "I know." That afternoon, the document arrived by email. 37 pages. Luxembourg entity references, beneficial interests, security provisions, cross-default language. Terms I could understand individually, but not in combination. I read 6 pages, realized pride was becoming dangerous, and called Cedric Mallory. Cedric had been my attorney for 16 years. He handled property purchases, business disputes, employment contracts, and the occasional letter that needed to sound polite while promising consequences. He was 59, gray-haired, calm, and allergic to drama. "It is Sunday," he said when he answered. "I know. Are you arrested?" "No." "Then this had better involve real estate." "It does. Send it." I forwarded the trust. 23 minutes later, he called back. "Who gave you this?" "My daughter's future father-in-law, and he described it as estate planning." "Yes." Cedric went quiet. "Ansel, do not sign this." "I wasn't going to." "Good. What is it?" "It is structured so assets contributed by your side become available as security inside the holding structure. The commercial land is specifically identified by parcel reference. If certain affiliated obligations default, lenders can assert rights against trust assets. Carpenter language, Cedric. You put your land in. Their debt fails. Your property becomes the answer." My jaw tightened. Can they do that without Leora understanding? If she signs what they call the spousal participation documents, yes. The language is buried across multiple schedules. It is designed to look like family pooling. I stood at my desk. "How much debt?" "I need Malcolm's material." I sent it. Cedric called again an hour later. "This is worse than I thought." "How?" "The lender exposure appears connected to Belori obligations already under stress. They are not creating protection for a future risk. They are trying to bring fresh collateral into an existing problem." I looked out the study window toward the guest cottage. Eder sat on the porch drinking my wine. "They flew here for my land, possibly." "No, they did." Cedric lowered his voice. Do not confront them tonight. I know. What do you want to do? I thought about Leora. If I exposed everything privately, Raffaele could deny pieces. Ettore could call it a misunderstanding. Vittoria could cry cultural difference. They could turn my daughter's hope against the truth before she had time to process it. I want them to believe I'm signing. Cedric sighed. Of course you do. At the rehearsal dinner. Why publicly? Because both families will be there and they have already built their story about me. I want the documents explained once clearly with witnesses. That is theatrical. Yes. Legally unnecessary. Yes. He paused. Potentially effective. I smiled. Now you sound like my lawyer. The next morning, I found Ettore on the porch. I read the draft, I said. He straightened. And too complicated for me. His expression softened with relief. I understand. I want Cedric to prepare a clean master version. Something simple enough everybody can understand. We sign at the rehearsal dinner, family together. Ettore blinked. Then he smiled. That is a beautiful idea. Vittoria stepped outside behind him. What idea, Ettore? Explained in Italian, thinking I would not follow. He wants his lawyer to simplify it. Public signing at the dinner. Better. It makes refusal impossible later. Vittoria smiled. He really is eager. I scratched my chin. Everything all right? Perfect, she said in English. I nodded. Good. For the next 2 weeks, they celebrated a victory that had never existed. Malcolm assembled corporate records, filings, debt notices, litigation documents, and translations. Cedric mapped each trust clause to the liability it exposed. I kept smiling. I let Ettore correct my grill temperature. I let Vittoria tell me American table settings were casual. I let Raphael call me Dad twice. The hardest part was Leora. She was happy. She sent me photographs of wildflower arrangements and asked whether I preferred linen or cotton napkins. She talked about honeymoon flights, apartment furniture, and whether children should learn Italian from birth. Every conversation felt like carrying a glass bowl toward a floor I knew was about to disappear. One evening, she sat beside me on the porch steps. You really like them more than you did at first, don't you? I looked toward the guest cottage. I understand them better, she smiled. I knew you would. That sentence nearly broke me. I put my arm around her. I love you. She laughed. I know, Dad. No, I mean I love you enough that you may be angry with me soon. Her smile faded. What does that mean? I had gone too far. I squeezed her shoulder. It means weddings make fathers strange. She rolled her eyes. You've always been strange. I let her believe it. The rehearsal dinner was 6 days away. And I had just learned one more thing from Malcolm. Raphael's lawsuit included an allegation that he had once used his former fiancée's family company as collateral without fully disclosing the risk. My daughter was not the first. She was simply the next. Malcolm's email arrived at 4:11 on Monday morning. I know the time because I had been awake since 3, sitting in my study with a cold mug of coffee and the trust documents spread across the desk. Sleep had become difficult once every happy wedding conversation started carrying a second meaning. I opened the attachment expecting another filing or bank notice. Instead, I found a civil complaint from Milan, translated into English, naming Raphael Bellori personally. The plaintiff was a former business partner, but buried in the chronology was a woman named Alessia Rinaldi, former fiancée. Her family owned a packaging company near Bergamo. According to the complaint, Raffaele had encouraged a joint strategic pledge of family assets to support a distribution venture. The documents alleged the Rinaldi family had not been fully informed that their assets would secure pre-existing obligations. When the venture failed, the engagement ended and litigation followed. I read the paragraph 6 times. Then I called Malcolm. He answered with a groan. You are not supposed to call before coffee exists. She was engaged to him? Yes. Did Leora know? No evidence she does. Same structure, not identical. But the pattern is close enough that I would never let my daughter sign anything with him. I looked at the trust draft. This was practiced. That is my concern. Can we contact Alessia? Malcolm was quiet. I already did. I sat straighter. She answered. Her attorney did. She is willing to provide a written statement through counsel. She does not want public attention. What does the statement say? That Raphael represented a collateral agreement as mutual family planning, and minimized existing debt exposure. Her father signed. They lost control of a warehouse property during the fallout. The air left my chest. One family had already lived the future Raphael was offering mine. Send it to Cedric. Already did. I ended the call and walked outside. Dawn had not reached the orchard yet. The guest cottage lights were off. Somewhere behind those windows, Ettore and Vittoria were sleeping peacefully inside a building I constructed, while their son slept at Leora's apartment 20 minutes away. For the first time, I hated them. Not the hot hatred of confrontation. A colder thing, the kind that makes you careful. At 7, Leora called. Dad, I need your opinion. I almost laughed at the cruelty of timing. On what? Raphael wants us to open a joint investment account before the wedding. Just for shared goals. Normal, right? I closed my eyes. What does your financial advisor say? I don't have one. Then get one before you combine anything substantial. She laughed. You sound like a pamphlet. I'm serious. Dad, we are getting married. That does not make questions disloyal. She became quiet. Did something happen? I wanted to tell her everything. Instead, I said, promise me you will not sign financial documents you have not reviewed with your own independent professional. Independent from Raphael? Yes. Why are you saying it like that? Because marriage is emotional. Contracts should not be. She sighed. Fine. I promise. It was not enough, but it was something. That afternoon, I met Cedric in his office. He had built a presentation, not slides exact, but a clean evidence packet organized into 5 sections. Bellori Company distress, existing tax and lender claims, Raphael's civil suit, Alessia Rinaldi's statement, the proposed trust language showing my property as exposed collateral. You are not going to read 40 pages at dinner, he said. Good. You are going to state the facts, then I explain the legal structure if challenged. Good. You do not accuse anyone of criminal conduct unless the evidence supports it. I won't. You do not threaten, I don't need to. Cedric looked at me. That is the line I find most concerning. I smiled. He slid another document toward me. What is this? A protective declaration for Leora, if she wants it later. Confirmation that no Merrick property will enter any marital trust without her independent counsel and your direct written authorization where applicable. She doesn't own my property. No. But this makes it harder for anyone to claim there was a family commitment. I signed it. Then Cedric said, there is another issue. I looked up. Ettore has been contacting a lender in Luxembourg from a U.S. number associated with a temporary SIM. Malcolm found a message reference in disclosed European filings. Timing suggests they may be presenting the proposed trust as imminent collateral. They're already using the promise. Possibly, my jaw tightened. Then Friday matters. The rehearsal dinner was Saturday. We decided nothing should happen before then unless Leora was asked to sign. Friday afternoon, I went to my fabrication yard to work, not manage, work. I put on gloves and spent 2 hours helping fit a bronze stair rail for a hotel renovation. The men on my floor knew I was distracted but did not ask. Metal is useful when your thoughts become too large. It either fits or it does not. Heat changes it. Pressure changes it. Measurement tells you where you are. At 3:17, Raphael arrived. He rarely came to the yard. He walked through the shop in expensive shoes, smiling at employees, visibly impressed by the size of the operation. I watched him stop near the loading bay and look beyond the fence toward the acreage. So this is the famous land, he said. Some of it. More valuable than I imagined. I wiped my hands. Is that why you came? He laughed. No, Leora is busy. I wanted to talk man to man. That phrase usually means someone wants the benefit of intimacy without the inconvenience of honesty. We walked to my office. Raphael sat across from me. I know my parents can be intense. They are memorable. He smiled. I also know the trust may feel foreign. Very. I want you to understand, I would never do anything that risks Leora. I studied his face. How did Alessia feel about your business judgment? Everything changed. It was small. A tightening around the eyes. One missed breath. His hand stopped moving toward the water bottle. Who? Alessia Rinaldi. He recovered quickly. That was years ago. You were engaged. Yes, Leora knows. My past relationship is not relevant. Did her family lose property after signing a collateral agreement connected to your business? He stood. Where did you hear this? I stayed seated. Sit down. He stared at me, then slowly sat. That situation was completely different. I'm listening. The Ronaldos knew the risk. Alessia says they did not. His face darkened. You spoke to her, her attorney. Rafael leaned forward. Ansel, you are making a mistake. My family's finances are complicated, yes. European businesses restructure. Lawsuits happen. That does not mean anyone is trying to exploit you. Then why is my parcel number inside a trust tied to Bellori debt? He went pale. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, You had a lawyer read it. Yes, you told my father you were overwhelmed. I was. That was an act. No, I was overwhelmed. Then I asked someone qualified. Anger flashed. You have been investigating us. I have been verifying what you did not disclose. Raphael stood again. This wedding is between me and Leora. Correct. Then stay out of it. I looked at him. The moment your family put my land in a debt instrument, you invited me into it. His jaw clenched. You do not understand how much pressure my father is under. And you do not understand that pressure is not permission. He paced toward the window, then he turned. Does Leora know? Not yet. Relief flickered. That told me something. Do not tell her before Saturday, he said. I almost smiled. Why? Because she is stressed. She will misunderstand. Let us explain it together. You want one more controlled room. That is not fair. Neither is hiding a lawsuit from the woman you plan to marry. His voice dropped. I love her. I believe you may. That surprised him. Then why are you doing this? Because loving someone does not make everything you do to them loving. He stared at me. I continued. You have until tomorrow to tell her about Alessia, the lawsuit, your family's financial condition, and the real purpose of the trust. His face tightened. And if I don't, then I will. You will destroy her. No, my voice became quiet. The truth may hurt her. The lie is what destroys. Raphael left without saying goodbye. I called Leora 3 hours later. She sounded normal, too normal. Raphael had not told her. That night I walked to the guest cottage. Eder and Vittoria were on the screened porch speaking Italian. He is suspicious, Raphael's voice said through Eder's phone on speaker. My steps stopped in the dark beyond the hydrangeas. Eder answered, then accelerate. The signing must happen before the girl panics. Vittoria said, does the father know about Rinaldi, Raffaele? Yes, Ettore swore. Then Vittoria said something I will never forget. Leora will choose you. Women always protect the future they already announced. I stood under the trees, listening. They were counting on my daughter being too embarrassed to cancel a wedding, counting on invitations, deposits, photographs, relatives, and public expectations to become pressure stronger than truth. I turned back toward the house. For the first time, I understood what the rehearsal dinner needed to accomplish. It was not enough to expose the Belloris. Leora needed a room where canceling the future would be less humiliating than entering it. If she chose Raffaele after seeing everything, that choice would be hers. But nobody would ever again be able to tell her she had imagined the danger. Saturday morning began with flowers. Leora arrived at 9 carrying 2 buckets of wildflowers from a farm outside Weaverville, black-eyed Susans, white cosmos, mountain mint, and stems of goldenrod. She wore old jeans, one of my work shirts, and no makeup. For the first time in weeks, she looked like the girl who used to sit on my shop floor making sculptures from metal scraps while Celeste worked in the garden. Help me? With flowers? You own hands. Those hands have standards. She rolled her eyes. We spent an hour arranging flowers in jars for the rehearsal dinner. I was terrible at it. Leora moved my stems after I placed them and claimed she was not correcting me. Halfway through, she said, Raphael is weird today. My hand stopped. How? Distracted. Defensive. He asked whether you talked to me about his old business. I looked at her. What did you say? That you hadn't. She waited. I went back to the flowers. Dad. Yes? What is going on? The moment had arrived whether I wanted it or not. I set down the clippers. Sit. Her face changed. We sat at the kitchen table. I did not give her every document. I did not dump 3 weeks of fear into her lap like evidence at trial. I started with one truth. Raphael was engaged before. She blinked. No, he wasn't. He was. To who? Alessia Rinaldi. That's not possible. I waited. She stood. He told me his longest relationship before me was 2 years. I have a statement from Alessia's attorney. Her face drained. What statement? I told her. The failed venture, the collateral arrangement, the loss of the family warehouse, Raphael's current lawsuit. I watched each fact land separately. Leora paced to the window. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I needed proof. You investigated him behind my back. Yes. She turned, furious. You had no right. I had every right to investigate a document asking for my property. That is not the same as his relationships. No. She stared at me. I could see the conflict moving through her. Daughter, fiancé, therapist, woman who had announced a wedding to everyone she knew. Does Raphael know you know? Yes. When? Yesterday. Her eyes widened and he didn't tell me. No, she sat down hard. That was the first crack. Not the debt, not Alessia. The fact that he had been given 24 hours to tell the truth and chose not to. What else? She asked. I took a breath. The trust is not what they told you. She closed her eyes. Of course it isn't. I explained the high-level structure. My land as collateral. The lorry liabilities. Luxembourg lender exposure. I kept the language simple because emotional pain does not improve comprehension. Leora listened without interrupting. When I finished, she whispered, He was going to let me sign it? Yes. Did he know? I believe so. Believe? He discussed the purpose in Italian with his parents. She looked at me. What do you mean? I had saved the most personal fact for last. I speak Italian. For 3 seconds she just stared. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny. A shocked, broken sound. You what? Fluently enough. Since when? Since before you were born. Dad. I worked in Italy 4 years. You said you picked up some phrases. I did several thousand. She covered her face with both hands. I waited. Then her head lifted slowly. You heard them? Yes. At the restaurant? Yes. What did they say about me? That was the question I wanted to avoid. Leora, what did they say? I told her enough. Predictable. Useful. That she would defend the marriage once it was public. I did not repeat every insult about her clothes or hometown. Cruelty does not become more truthful because you preserve every syllable. Her eyes filled. And Raffaele? He laughed. He said, My desire to see you happy made me easy to manage. She stood and walked outside. I did not follow immediately. 5 minutes later, I found her sitting on the low stone wall near Celeste's orchard. She was crying silently. I sat beside her. Mom would have known, she said. Maybe. No. She would have looked at him once and known. I smiled sadly. Your mother married me. Her judgment was not flawless. Leora laughed through tears. Then she leaned against my shoulder. What do I do? That question terrified me more than any financial scheme because I had no right to answer it for her. You decide. What would you do? I am not marrying him. Dad, I mean it. This is your life. She stared across the orchard. The wedding is next Saturday, I know. Everyone is here, I know. Deposits, I know. His family, I know. She shook her head. I feel stupid. No, I am a therapist. I tell parents to trust patterns, watch behavior, communicate. I missed everything. You were in love. That's not an excuse. No, but it is context. She wiped her face. What are you doing tonight? I told her about the evidence packet and the public signing plan. Her eyes widened. You were going to expose them in front of everyone? Yes, that is insane. Probably. She almost smiled. Then she became serious. Do it. I looked at her. You are sure? I want them to say it. In front of everyone. I want no story later that you misunderstood them because you hate foreigners or because you are controlling. Her voice hardened. And I want Raphael to have one chance to tell me the truth before you speak. That is fair. She stood. I'm going to call him. Do you want me there? No. That was the right answer. She drove away at noon. At 1:40, Raphael called me. You poisoned her against me. I stayed quiet. She is refusing to see me until tonight. She asked you yesterday for honesty. You had no right to give me a deadline. I gave you an opportunity. You are enjoying this. No. He breathed hard into the phone. My parents could lose everything. Then perhaps they should have told lenders the truth before asking my daughter to secure the loss. You do not understand family obligation. I understand it very well. That is why I am protecting mine. He hung up. At 3, Eder marched from the guest cottage to my workshop. He did not bother with English. You arrogant provincial, he said in Italian. You think you can humiliate my family? I answered in Italian for the first time. No, Eder. You handled that yourself. He stopped dead. The expression on his face was worth every insult I had swallowed. Vittoria appeared behind him, I continued. I understood you at the restaurant, on my porch, in my yard. Through every joke, every plan, every time you discussed my daughter as collateral with a pulse. Vittoria went pale. Eder's mouth opened. I raised one hand. Save it for dinner. He stared at me. You planned this. I verified you. That trust could save both families. No, it could save yours by risking mine. Vittoria whispered, Does Leora know? Yes. Her face collapsed. That told me exactly whose decision they feared. I pointed toward the guest cottage. You may stay there tonight. After the rehearsal dinner, you leave my property. Eder's composure broke. You cannot speak to us like this. I just did. He stepped toward me. I did not move. I spent 40 years around men who thought volume was leverage. Edor stopped when he realized I was not stepping back. Tonight, I said, you will sit at my table, listen while the documents are explained, and answer whatever questions Leora asks. If you walk away before that, Cedric will send the evidence packet to every attorney already connected to the trust discussions. His face tightened. Blackmail? No, preservation. He looked at me with pure hatred. Then he turned and walked away. At 5:30, Cedric arrived carrying 2 folders and a club soda. Malcolm joined by video from Atlanta, available if needed. At 6:10, guests began arriving. 46 people. String lights over the back terrace. Wildflowers on the tables. Music under the trees. Leora arrived alone. No ring on her finger. She had taken it off before the dinner started. Nobody noticed at first. Raphael noticed immediately, and for the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely afraid. Before the first course, Leora caught me alone beside the service table and touched my sleeve. Her hands were cold despite the warm evening. If I change my mind, if I decide I cannot do this in front of everyone, you stop, she said. I told her I would immediately, no questions asked. That mattered because the dinner could only be her protection if she still controlled whether the truth became public. She looked across the terrace at Raphael, drew one slow breath, and said, I'm not changing my mind. The rehearsal dinner looked beautiful. That is one of the cruel details I remember most clearly. The wildflowers Leora and I had arranged sat in mismatched glass jars across long white tables. String lights ran from the old oaks to the guest cottage and back, glowing warm against the early September dusk. My crew had built the steel frames holding the lights years earlier for Celeste's 50th birthday, and seeing them used for this night felt like a strange collision between the family I had and the family someone else had tried to manufacture around us. 46 guests filled the terrace. My sister and her husband. Rosamund? No, that was another life. Here it was my brother, 2 cousins, shop supervisors who had known Leora since she was small, several of her college friends, colleagues from the clinic, and Raphael's extended relatives who had flown in from Europe and New York. Ettore and Vittoria sat near the head of the table, composed again. Their fear had been pressed beneath expensive clothing and posture. Raphael circulated among guests with the fixed brightness of a man whose future depended on no one asking the right question. Leora wore a dark green dress, no ring. I saw people notice eventually. Her best friend noticed first and whispered something. Leora shook her head and smiled without answering. Dinner began. Raphael attempted to sit beside her. She moved his place card to the opposite side of the table. What are you doing? He whispered, giving myself room. His face tightened. He did not argue. Cedric sat near the far end pretending to be an old business friend. He had the evidence packet in a slim leather folder beside his chair. Malcolm was available by phone if anything needed live confirmation. I had rehearsed a speech twice. Then I threw it away. At 8:17, after the main course was cleared, I stood and tapped my ring against my wineglass. Conversation softened. Leora looked at me. I looked back. She nodded once. That was permission. Most of you know I am not good at speeches, I began. I build things. I prefer drawings, dimensions, and objects that either stand up or fall down. A few people laughed. I also believe marriage is something you build. Not because it is romantic to say that, but because anything carrying real weight needs honest connections. Raphael stopped smiling. I raised my glass toward Eder and Vittoria. I want to thank our guests from Italy for traveling so far. 3 weeks ago, I was worried we might struggle to understand each other. Eder's jaw tightened. So I thought tonight I would remove that problem. I switched to Italian. The sound traveled across the terrace like a door slamming. Eder froze. Vittoria's wineglass stopped halfway to her mouth. Raphael closed his eyes. Several guests looked confused. Leora did not. For 3 weeks, I continued in Italian. You discussed my daughter as a useful path to collateral. You mocked my work, my home, and my intelligence. You said my love for Leora made me predictable. You were correct about one thing, I am predictable. When someone tries to use my daughter, I stop them. Nobody moved. Then I switched back to English. For anyone who does not speak Italian, I just told the Bellori family that I understood every word they said when they believed I could not. A murmur spread. Raphael stood. Ansel, this is not the place. Leora spoke before I could. Sit down. His head turned toward her. Her voice was calm. Sit, he did. I opened Cedric's folder. 2 weeks ago, the Belloris asked me to contribute 17 acres of commercial property and 2 warehouse buildings to what they described as a family wedding trust. I held up the first document. They said it would protect Leora and Raphael. Ettore finally spoke. It would. Cedric stood. With respect, it would also make contributed Merrick assets available as security within a structure exposed to existing Bellori obligations. People turned toward him. I introduced him. This is Cedric Mallory, my attorney. Cedric explained the structure in plain language. No theatrics. No accusation beyond the document. If Bellori-linked debt defaulted under specified conditions, trust assets, including my commercial property, could be reached. Eder interrupted. That is a distortion. Cedric opened the relevant schedule. Page 24, Section 9. Cross-default and security enforcement. He slid it across. Eder did not touch it. I continued. Bellori Mercantile has been in restructuring proceedings for nearly 2 years. There are tax and lender claims against family assets. Vittoria's face crumpled. This is private. It stopped being private when my land appeared in your solution. Raphael stood again. None of this means I used Leora. She looked at him. Then tell me about Alessia. The name hit him visibly. Whispers moved along the table. Raphael looked at her. Leora, tell me, that was a different relationship. Were you engaged? Yes. You told me you had never been engaged. He said nothing. Did her family sign a collateral agreement connected to your business? It was more complicated. Did they lose a warehouse? Silence. Tears rose in Leora's eyes, but her voice remained steady. You had yesterday to tell me. Raphael's face twisted. I was trying to protect you from panic. She laughed once. Protect me? He stepped toward her. I love you. Then why did you need me uninformed? That question ended him more effectively than anything I had prepared. Raphael reached for her hand. She stepped back. Do not touch me. The terrace went still. Leora removed the engagement ring from her small clutch and placed it on the table. I took this off before I arrived. Raphael stared at it. Leora, please. No. Her voice shook now. I can forgive debt. I can forgive business failure. I can even forgive parents who are arrogant, because God knows my father can be difficult. A few nervous laughs broke the tension. I almost objected. She continued. I cannot marry a man who needed me ignorant. Raphael's shoulders collapsed. The wedding is over. Vittoria stood. You are making a terrible emotional decision. Leora turned toward her. No. The emotional decision was saying yes before I knew who I was marrying. Eder slammed one hand on the table. This family is humiliating us. I looked at him. You flew across an ocean with a debt instrument and called it a wedding gift. His face went red. I will not be lectured by a metal worker, I answered in Italian. Then be lectured by your lender. Cedric placed a final page on the table. A notice confirming no Merrick asset would enter the proposed trust, along with formal withdrawal of any draft consent. Eder stared at it. I took a slow drink of wine. Then I said, You may remain in the guest cottage tonight. You will leave my property by 10 tomorrow morning. Vittoria gasped. You would throw us out? No, I am ending hospitality. Raphael looked at Leora. Can we talk privately? She hesitated, then nodded. They walked toward the orchard. I did not follow. That mattered. This was no longer a father rescuing his daughter by controlling the next decision. She had the truth. She needed space to own what came after it. The dinner fractured into small conversations. Some guests left early. Others came to me with questions I refused to answer, beyond what had already been said. Leora's best friend hugged me. My shop foreman told me quietly that if Ettore needed help carrying luggage, he was available in a purely non-violent capacity. I told him to eat dessert. 20 minutes later, Leora returned alone. Raphael walked behind her at a distance. He stopped at the edge of the terrace. Ansel, I looked at him. I am sorry. For what? He swallowed. For lying to her. That is a start. For the trust. A start. For the things I said. I nodded. He looked toward Leora. Is there any chance? She answered. Not tonight. He closed his eyes. That was more mercy than I would have given him. At 9:46, Ettore approached me near the drink table. Your performance was very effective. It was not a performance. You planned the humiliation. I planned the truth. Same thing in America? No. But people who depend on secrecy often confuse them. He stared at me with hatred and something beneath it. Fear. What happens to our business is not your concern. I agree. Then you will not send documents to anyone. My attorney will preserve everything connected to the proposed transaction. What your lenders already know is between you and them. His jaw tightened. You could help. There it was. Even now, I looked at him. You still think this ends with my property? He said nothing. No, Ettore. I switched to Italian. Find another way to save what you built. He walked away. Leora came to stand beside me. The party was almost over. The string lights reflected in her eyes. You okay? I asked. No. Good answer. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I feel like everyone is looking at me. They are. Helpful. Sorry. She laughed through tears. Then she whispered, Thank you for not telling me what to do. I looked at her. That was the hardest part. I know. We stood together while the last guests left. Behind us, the Belloris gathered their things from the terrace. The trust documents remained open on the table. For 3 weeks, they had treated my silence like ignorance. That night, silence belonged to them. The guest cottage was empty by 9:32 the next morning. Ettore and Vittoria left without breakfast, which surprised me only because Vittoria had spent 3 weeks criticizing American coffee while drinking 2 cups every morning. Raphael stayed behind longer. His suitcase sat near the cottage steps while he waited for a car to take him to Asheville. Leora had gone home before midnight and turned off her phone. I was in the workshop when Raphael knocked. Can I come in? I almost said no. Then I remembered he had once stood in that same room asking for my blessing. Come. He entered slowly. Without the suit, without his parents, without the certainty of a wedding 7 days away, he looked exhausted. I want to say something before I leave. I'm listening. He looked around the shop at steel samples. Drawings, welding helmets, and a half-finished bronze railing. I did love her. I believe you. His eyes lifted. You do? Yes. He seemed almost angry at the answer. Then why does everyone talk like I was running a con from the beginning? Because you allowed love to coexist with a plan that required deception. He looked down. My father's company employs 80 people. That matters. If it collapses, families lose jobs. My parents lose their home. My uncle loses his pension. It is not just some rich family trying to protect a villa. That also matters. He stepped closer. Then you understand why I was desperate. I understand desperation. I set down the drawing I had been holding. What I do not accept is using my daughter's trust as a financing tool. He rubbed his face. I thought once we were married, once everything stabilized, I could explain. After she signed? Yes. After my property was committed? He said nothing. That is not explanation. That is disclosure after consent has stopped mattering. Raphael sank onto a stool. My father said the structure was temporary. Lenders do not care what fathers call things at dinner. A bitter smile touched his mouth. You really are impossible. Ask Leora. His face tightened. She will not answer. She is hurt. I know. Then give her room. He looked toward the open shop door. I lost everything in one night? No. He turned back. You lost the version of everything that depended on nobody finding out. He absorbed that. Then he nodded slowly. Goodbye, Ansel. Goodbye, Raphael. He left. I watched the car carry him down the driveway and felt no triumph. That surprised me. For 3 weeks, I had imagined exposure as a finish line. Once the truth came out, I thought the danger would vanish and relief would take its place. Instead, the morning after looked ordinary. Birds in the orchard, trucks on the road, employees texting about Monday schedules. A daughter somewhere 20 minutes away whose future had just shattered. Truth solves deception. It does not solve grief. Leora arrived that afternoon. She wore sweatpants, carried no purse, and had spent enough hours crying that her face was swollen. I made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. For 10 minutes we said almost nothing. Then she asked, "Did he come by?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "That he loved you." She stared at the table. "Do you think he did?" "Yes." Her eyes filled again. "I wish you would say no." "I know. It would be easier." "I know." She pressed her palms against her face. "How can someone love you and still do that?" I thought about Celeste, about marriage, about every human contradiction I had seen. Because love does not automatically make people brave. Sometimes frightened people use the person they love as the place they hide. Leora lowered her hands. "That sounds like therapy." "I raised a therapist." She almost smiled. Then she became quiet. "I canceled everything. The wedding, venue, photographer, flowers, hotel block. Deposits, some gone, some refundable. Do you need help?" The question left my mouth automatically. Leora looked at me. "No." I felt strangely proud. "I can handle it. I know." She wiped her eyes. "Dad, I need you to promise something." "What?" "Do not turn this into a war with his family." I leaned back. "Why?" "Because I do not want the next 6 months of my life to be about destroying them. I wasn't planning to. You investigated them. To understand the risk. You exposed them publicly. With your permission. I know." She reached across the table. "I am grateful. But stop here." Her hand covered mine. "Please." I understood. Justice has a point where protection ends and appetite begins. "Okay." She squeezed my hand. "Thank you." Cedric handled the rest quietly. He sent formal withdrawal notices regarding the trust and documented the representations made about my property. Malcolm archived his research. We did not contact newspapers, employers, business competitors, or people unconnected to the attempted transaction. If lenders or courts discovered Bellori problems through their own processes, that belonged to the Belloris. 3 weeks later, Leora returned the last unopened wedding gift. A month after that, she moved out of the apartment she had partly furnished with Raphael and into a smaller place near her clinic. She refused my offer to pay the deposit. Boundaries, remember? That was fast. You created a monster. Apparently. She began therapy, not because something was wrong with her, but because betrayal rearranges your confidence. She told me that after Raffaele, she no longer trusted her own judgment. Her therapist's work was not to teach her how to detect liars. It was to help her understand that being deceived does not mean you consented to deception. That distinction mattered. I needed my own version of it. For weeks after the rehearsal dinner, I replayed the restaurant conversation and asked whether I should have spoken sooner. Could I have saved Leora some humiliation by confronting Raphael privately before the dinner? Did I make the truth more painful because I wanted the Belloris to feel exposed? The answer was uncomfortable. Partly. I had wanted witnesses because witnesses protected the facts. I had also wanted Ettore and Vittoria to experience the shame they had casually assigned to everyone else. I had to admit that. One Sunday I told Leora. I think I enjoyed part of it. She looked at me over breakfast. The toast? Yes, of course you did. That is not reassuring. She shrugged. You are human. I wanted to be better than them. Being better does not mean feeling nothing. I looked at her. When did you become smarter than me? Graduate school. Waste of money. She laughed. That laugh was the first sound that convinced me she would truly recover. By winter, the story had become something family members stopped discussing, unless Leora brought it up. She returned to work fully. She began teaching an evening workshop for parents of children with mobility disorders. She repainted her apartment. She adopted an old dog with one ear. I kept building. The commercial land remained exactly where it had been, 17 acres beside the interstate, producing rental income from 2 warehouse tenants and absolutely no rescue capital for European debt. One afternoon in January, Malcolm called. Bellori Mercantile entered formal insolvency proceedings. I closed my eyes. Does Leora need to know? That is your call. No. He paused. You really are done. Yes. How does that feel? I looked across my workshop at a steel stair stringer suspended from chains. Quieter. 2 months later, a letter arrived from Raphael. I did not open it. I gave it to Leora. She kept it for a week, then read it. She never told me what it said. I never asked. That was growth for both of us. The following spring, nearly 8 months after the canceled wedding, Leora came to the fabrication yard on a Saturday morning. She wore old jeans and brought coffee. What are you doing? Repairing your childhood. She looked confused. I led her to the back workbench. The walnut and steel bookshelf from her bedroom, the one similar to the piece Vittoria mocked at the restaurant, had been stored in my warehouse after Leora moved out years earlier. I had pulled it apart, cleaned the steel frame, repaired 2 cracked shelves, and refinished the wood. Leora touched the grain. You kept this? Of course. I thought Mom donated it. Your mother knew better. Her eyes filled. I handed her a sanding block. You helping, she smiled. Only if you do not criticize. I cannot agree to impossible conditions. We worked side by side for 3 hours. No wedding, no Beloris, no trust documents. Just wood, steel, coffee, and the ordinary repair of something made long before either of us understood how useful repair could become. When we finished, Leora ran her palm across the top shelf and said the repaired crack was still visible if you knew where to look. I told her good repairs often leave a line, not because the work failed, but because history should not have to lie in order to become strong again. A year after the rehearsal dinner, I returned to Rowan and Field, not because I wanted to revisit the scene. Leora invited me. She had been promoted to clinical supervisor and wanted to celebrate with dinner. When she suggested the restaurant, I asked whether she was sure. Very? Same table? No? Coward. She laughed. We sat near the window overlooking the hills. Horses moved along a fence line in the fading light. The wine list arrived, and Leora handed it to me. You choose. Dangerous. Pick something local. I ordered the same Yadkin Valley Cabernet Franc Ettore, had treated like an agricultural mistake. When the server poured it, Leora raised her glass. To provincial wine, I touched mine to hers. To expensive lessons. She smiled. The year had changed both of us. Leora was still careful with relationships, but not closed. She had started seeing someone casually, a physical therapist from another clinic named Hollis, but she refused to introduce him to me until, as she put it, I am certain you will not start a multinational investigation. I told her I made no promises. My life changed less dramatically. Merrick Architectural Metals continued operating, though I reduced my work week and gave 2 senior employees equity. I had spent decades assuming stepping back meant becoming less useful. The Bellori mess taught me that usefulness and control are not the same thing. A business should survive the founder's absence. A daughter should survive the father's protection. Love that requires permanent management is not love. It is dependency wearing a family name. The commercial property remained mine. Cedric helped me place it into a straightforward domestic estate structure with no exotic jurisdictions, no hidden collateral provisions, and no documents longer than necessary. Leora was not required to sign anything. She did not need to be. My assets were my responsibility until I chose otherwise. I also revised my will. Not because the Beloris almost reached my property, because the experience exposed a weakness in my thinking. I had assumed good estate planning meant deciding who gets what after death. Cedric taught me that good planning also means making sure living people cannot weaponize your generosity before then. We documented everything. Authority, ownership, succession. No vague family promises. No, we all understand what Dad wants. If I had learned anything from Raphael, it was that ambiguity is fertile ground for people who benefit from interpretation. Leora asked once whether I regretted not telling anyone I spoke Italian. No. Not even me, that part maybe. She gave me a look. You let me spend 31 years thinking your Italian vocabulary was pizza and grazy. I knew gelato. You are impossible. The truth was that language had become part of the lesson in my mind. Everyone talks about listening, as though it means waiting quietly while another person speaks. That is not what listening is. Listening is noticing what people say when they think the consequences are far away. It is paying attention to jokes that depend on someone's humiliation. It is noticing when business language enters a family conversation before anyone has explained why. It is hearing your own child say, "I trust him," and understanding that trust deserves facts, not cynicism. The dangerous part is what you do after you hear, "I nearly made a mistake at the restaurant." Every instinct in me wanted to stand up and expose them immediately. I could have spoken Italian across the table and enjoyed the shock on their faces. It would have felt powerful. It also would have accomplished very little. They would have denied, minimized, adjusted, deleted, warned attorneys, changed documents. Most importantly, Leora would have watched her father explode over a conversation she could not verify and might have defended the man she loved out of shock alone. Patience gave me evidence. But patience can become another vanity if you start loving the trap more than the truth. That is why the part I am proudest of is not the toast. It is the afternoon. Leora asked me not to turn the exposure into war, and I listened. I could have pursued humiliation after the danger ended. I could have circulated the Bellori records. I could have contacted business partners, newspapers, wedding guests, anyone who might make their collapse louder. I did not. Protection had been achieved. Everything after that would have been appetite. There is a difference worth knowing. Raphael's life did not end. Neither did Eddar's or Vittoria's. Bellori Mercantile went through insolvency. Assets were sold. According to the last thing Malcolm ever told me, Eddar stepped down from management, and Raphael took a salaried role with another food distributor. I did not ask for details. People who hurt you are still allowed to have futures. That statement took me time. Forgiveness is not the same as pretending they were harmless. It is deciding their failure does not deserve permanent residency in your mind. Leora eventually read Raphael's letter. Months later, she told me only one sentence. He apologized without asking for me back. That matters. Yes. Did you forgive him? She thought about it. I think I stopped needing to hate him. That was a better answer. We finished dinner at Rowan and Field with coffee. As we waited for the check, Leora looked toward the artisan display wall. A new photograph had replaced my staircase. This one showed a forged bronze garden gate from a shop owned by one of my former apprentices. Pretty, Leora said. Excellent hinge work. Of course that is what you notice. I have standards, she smiled. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you. For dinner, for hearing them. I looked at her. I wish you never had to. I know. She squeezed my hand. But you did, that was enough. If you are listening to this story because someone in your own family is making you doubt what you see, remember something I learned too late. Love is not a reason to ignore patterns. It is a reason to examine them carefully before they become permanent. Do not confuse politeness with trust. Do not confuse education, wealth, culture, charm, or family status with character. People with excellent manners can still make terrible plans. People with calloused hands can understand complicated things. And the quietest person at the table may be the only one who understands every language being spoken. If money, property, marriage, or inheritance are involved, ask questions before signatures appear. Get independent professional advice. Never let urgency become the reason you stop reading. A person who loves you may be disappointed by your questions, but they should not be threatened by your right to understand. And if you are a parent, this lesson is harder. Protect your children, but do not replace their judgment with yours. I could expose the truth. I could not choose for Leora. The moment she placed her ring on that table had to belong to her, or the next controlling man in her life might simply have been me. That is the line I think about most. Real protection gives someone back their choices. Control makes the choice for them. A year later, I still work with my hands. I still drink local wine. I still speak Italian, though now Leora makes me prove it whenever we pass an Italian restaurant. And the bookshelf, Vittoria mocked. It stands in Leora's apartment again. She keeps family photographs on the top shelf, therapy books in the middle, and a small bowl of keys near the bottom. No wedding photos, no Raphael, no shame. Just a life that survived the truth. I keep one photograph from the canceled rehearsal dinner in a drawer at home. It shows the string lights before anyone knew what the night would become, Leora laughing with a friend while Raphael stands blurred in the background. I do not keep it to remember revenge. I keep it because it reminds me that a beautiful picture can be completely real and still fail to show the danger just outside the frame. That is why evidence matters, and why intuition should lead to questions rather than conclusions. So before this story ends, I want to ask you, at what point would you have spoken? At the first insult in Italian? The moment you heard the word trust? After you discovered the debt? Or would you have waited, as I did, until everyone involved could hear the whole truth at once? Tell me in the comments. And if you have ever been underestimated because of your job, your age, your accent, your education, or simply because you stayed quiet, tell me that too. If this story about family, betrayal, patience, and boundaries meant something to you, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next one. Share it with someone who may need the reminder that asking questions is not disloyalty and protecting yourself is not cruelty. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Listen carefully, ask for clarity, protect what you built, and remember, silence does not always mean someone failed to understand. Sometimes it means they understood everything and are deciding what the truth requires next.